Architecture Museum, and we'll travel to France, to Germany, and hopefully soon also to London. The reason why I was the curator of that exhibition is that I have a relation to Bangladesh for 6 years now, very short time. I'm very happy that Rahul is here. He knows much better what's going on there. He will support me. But still, I have a 6-year relationship now with Bangladesh, and most of all with the architecture scene down there. The reason why I went to Bangladesh was actually that building here, which is related to water. It's a parliament building, one of the most important modern buildings of the 20th century by Louis Kahn. And this is a building we all know about, and we have plenty of books about, but nobody has, or hardly anybody from the West has seen it. So I decided to go down and visit the building. But that was not the only magnificent moment I could experience in Bangladesh. The more important thing that happened to me was that I was welcomed by the hospitality of Bangladeshi architects, and I was involved into a discussion there, so I kept going back many times during the last 6 years. I had also the opportunity to teach there at the Bengal Institute for architecture, landscape and settings. Anyway, this is a bit behind the whole story. The exhibition was called Bengal Stream, the vibrant architecture scene of Bangladesh, and as you can see from the title, it's all about streaming, all about water in Bangladesh. So if we talk about architecture or building with water, then we should definitely have a look at Bangladesh. Again, that was the exhibition here. We had some historical pieces and, of course, contemporary architecture, about 60 projects with a lot of models shipped from Bangladesh, all printed on textiles, drawings. We had some movie sound. We really wanted to bring a certain atmosphere to the white cube of the museum that is related to the environment in Bangladesh. Then there's a book we have brought out. You can have it, you can purchase it here if you want to. It is the first comprehensive book about the architecture scene of Bangladesh, and we had renowned architecture photographer Ivan Ban doing a photo essay and capturing some of the buildings, which was a great luck for the whole project. Now, what do we know about Bangladesh? Of course, here in England you may know much more than myself coming from Switzerland, because there is, of course, a long relationship between England and the subcontinent. Bangladesh in South Asia, somehow at the border between the culture of wheat and the culture of rice. It is located in the largest delta on Earth, which is one. We have the Ganges River and the Brahmaputra coming from the north. This is Himalaya. There's a little bit of India up here, but all this here is one big delta, and it is more or less the territory of today's Bangladesh. What do we know about Bangladesh? Of course, textile industry, maybe about the shipbreaking yards, and maybe we're still thinking Bangladesh is a country which is in hunger, in pain, like it was in 1971. The world got aware of that young country which was just born in 1971. But time, of course, has not stood still in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is now becoming a driving force, also economic-wise, in Southeast Asia, and there is a very vibrant architecture scene, most of all. In 47, India was divided into Hindustan and Pakistan, and funnily enough, Pakistan was consisting of a western part and an eastern part, some 100 kilometers apart from each other. It could have been predicted that this is not going to end well. One country having two parts totally remote from each other. And after the division of India into Hindustan and Pakistan, there was another division, Bangladesh becoming independent. There was a long fight, a long struggle for that independence from West Pakistan. A war 9 months long, and having roughly estimated 3 million victims at that time. So Bangladesh was born in 71 finally, and this is how it looks like geographically. Again, up here Himalaya, down here the Bay of Bengal, the capital Dhaka in the middle. Basically, the delta. That's the outline of the map, and if you look at the map in a different way, talking about water, well, I'm coming back to this later, sorry. First, some relations in terms of size. You have to compare it with the UK. So Bangladesh is smaller than the UK, roughly the same size like England, but it's much more populated. The population of Bangladesh is today 165 million, whereas the UK has about 65 million. And when you compare the density across the country. The capital Dhaka, again, much denser than London, for example. And this is the development of the population into the future. Whereas in Europe or the West, basically a flat curve, we have a very steep curve. And in 2050, roughly 250 million people will inhabit the territory of Bangladesh. This figure is quite interesting because now we are at a stage where half of the world's population is living in the countryside and half in urban settlements or urban agglomerations. In Bangladesh, this is not the case. Still 75% are living in the rural areas. So when talking about architecture in Bangladesh, we have to talk a lot about rural developments, not only about the city like Dhaka or Chittagong. Now again, the outline of the map, and this is how it looks like when you map the rivers. There is hundreds and hundreds of rivers, of course the big rivers of Jamuna and Padma, and most of all down here in the Sundarbans, the forest area, it simply looks like that. So when it comes to water, I think Bangladesh is the place to look at. This is the landscape there. It's a very flat landscape. During dry season, it might look like that. And there is a lot of flood affection each year. Flood is occurring through the melt of the snow from the Himalaya. Then there is some dams from India, which are sometimes just opened, and the whole water is coming down to Bangladesh. And of course, there is monsoon. And during flood season, almost 40% of the country can be affected, as you can see on that map. So there is a constant change between land mass and water mass. Sometimes you cannot tell whether you're on an island or whether you are in a river or whether this is solid land. There is another kind of natural force occurring in Bangladesh each year, the cyclones, which are coming from the south, from the Bay of Bengal, also having a big impact on settlements and on water regimes in the south of Bangladesh. This is the Bay of Bengal in the very south. This is Jamuna River network in the very north. We see the shifting lands. These islands are not there forever. They're shifting constantly, so people have to move from one island to the next. This is, I don't know if you can see it, flat landscape, so-called river chars, the islands in the north, which are shifting, and you may see it. This is inhabited land. This is not the moon or the desert. There are people everywhere, and they do not have another choice. They have to live there. As you have seen before, the country is highly densely populated, so people live everywhere. And once in a while, this is what is happening there. There is a lot of erosion along the rivers. Land is disappearing, and land is also accumulated. The green, the endless green, Bangladesh, I would say Ireland looks a bit pale in comparison to that kind of green. You have Bangladesh, for example. The images are really bad, I apologize. But you get a little impression. Settlements in the rural areas are mostly within the forest areas, and trees protecting the whole settlements. There is a settlement pattern of courtyard buildings. Mostly they are elevated from the level of the rivers. That's how it looks like. There's a lot of fishing down in the south, and this is the mangrove forest, the home Bengal tiger. Then we have the cities, the capital of Dhaka, for example. That's the spot here. And it's quite the contrast, of course, in the rural area. A highly densely populated city, 18 million people today. They expect it to be 30 million people by 2030. So it's a rapid growth. And the density, as you have seen it before in some of the figures, is an average of about 35,000 people per square kilometer, whereas London only has 4,500. It's all about people, about moving people, about traffic, of course. It's a very vibrant, vital city. Old Dhaka, for example, very densely populated. You see how dense living is there. And there is, as in the rural areas, still some water left in the city. A lot of landfill has happened already. So a lot of channels and water bodies and lakes are filled to gain land for construction, but still there are some of these ponds which are left. And architects are rethinking the whole system today to create again a cityscape which is related to the water. Transportation in the cities is on several points still done by boat. Then there are the ferries, big ferries, which are more than just boats. They're, I would say, public spaces, highly populated at night. And people are moving out to the countryside from the city with that way. The ship building tradition is still alive in Bangladesh. Most of all in the south and the river networks in the north. And talking about water, we definitely have to talk about monsoon. There's not a little rain, there's quite a lot of rain, heavy rains. It's a blessing, but it's a threat at the same time. And the buildings have to respond somehow to that climate. So the climate, the geography, everything is quite unique in Bangladesh, and this has brought out a very specific type of building, the pavilion, or as you all know, the bungalow. The bungalow does mean the Bengal hut. So the English, they brought the Bengal hut to the rest of the world. I see here standing right now in something similar like a bungalow. It's basically a roof, some columns. There is a need for airflow and most of all protection from sun and from monsoon. Settlement pattern, traditionally, and traditional house. I'm showing all this because contemporary architecture is very much looking back at the tradition and developing new and contemporary concepts out of this traditional and vernacular buildings. Bamboo is one of the most popular building materials, also when it comes to building in the city for the scaffoldings. And then brick is another important material, mostly around the cities. There is a lot of clay in the delta. There is no natural stone there. It's only sand and clay. So the building materials is wherever you want to build, basically. You find the clay, you can do sun-dried bricks, or you burn them in an oven, which is of course not the best thing in terms of carbon. There is a long tradition of brick buildings in the Ganges Delta. These Buddhist ruins, for example, are almost 1,000 years old. There is Hindu temples, and of course the Islamic culture, Mughal culture, which came to the Delta. And the British as well had some buildings down there, not in brick. It is all fake, but they pretended to have brick buildings. And then coming to modernity, it is important to mention Mazharul Islam, who was the father of the Bengali modernism. He was trained in the US and also in London at the AA, and came back to Bangladesh, or at that time to East Pakistan in the 50s. And he started a very particular Bengali modernism. It's a, let's say, interaction between the Western modernism and the tropical type of building. You see somehow a Corbusian building mixed up with the pavilion type of the tropics. He was very important. He's still very important today as a mentor, as a leading figure, establishing the profession of architecture in Bangladesh. He was basically the first architect there, and yes, done some magnificent buildings in brick, for example. He also was looking for collaboration between East and West. For example, with the American architect Stanley Tigerman. And around him there was a gathering of young architects, of students, and they were doing research on the history of the country or of the region to learn where they come from. This book came out 20 years back, and the architects that have brought out that book are today important figures of contemporary architecture themselves. Then Louis Kahn in the Delta. It was again Mazharul Islam who invited Louis Kahn to come to Dhaka, because Mazharul Islam himself was commissioned to build a new capital in East Pakistan. But he stepped back and he said, I'd rather have a very big master, so to build the capital. That was how Louis Kahn ended in the Delta. That's the building we all know. Dealing with water, of course. There were other important Western architects at the same time. In the 60s, for example, Paul some American architects building there some buildings. Then contemporary architecture is built up, as I mentioned before, with its Para's work, which is very much working through the society. It's not only for let's say, an upper class where architects provide their service, they provide it also to a lower class, to street children, for example. So architects are very much aware of social issues in today's Bangladesh. Now, building with water, this is building against water. This is what usually happens in certain areas of Bangladesh, especially near the cities. You see buildings not taking care of geography or the water flow, so they collapse sooner or later. But there are some very good examples for building with water. This example, for example, here is in the north of Bangladesh, again in the river Jor area. And the architect, Niklaus Chowdhury, he was wondering how you could build a jar which is not disappearing. So he gave that jar kind of that egg-shaped shape. So it's more like a streamline, and the whole thing then was raised. That's the actual flood level where the buildings normally stand. So the proposal was to create kind of an island or a ring which is elevated just a little bit above the flood level, so the settlement could move on top of that crater-like ring. And during the flood period, a lot of people can stay here for some weeks, some months, and during the year, this is for about 30 families. This is how it was done, the measurement of the land, and then the rising of the plinth. In the middle there is a pond collecting the rainwater. So during the flood season there is also fishing there and drinking water. That's how it looks like when it's done. The filled pond. The settlement moved towards Little Island. A very simple idea, but very effective. It's somehow an open source concept. Whoever wants to build such an island can do that. As far as I know, about 15 of these islands have been built till today. Again, Niklaus Chowdhury, also nearby there in the north of the country, where you find these Buddhist ruins as well. She was commissioned to build a training center. There is an NGO called Friendship. They are working with the poorest of the poor, mostly in the north of the country. And they wanted to have kind of a base, kind of a training learning center. But the land they could afford was, of course, the cheap land, which is usually the lowland. Only the roads are usually elevated, and all this land here is in the flood-affected area. So the challenge was to build a building on the lowland, but it should resist to the flood all year long. That's the area. That's how the landscape looks here. The paddy fields already flooded here, and that's the building on the lowland. And the thing was quite simple. The proposal, the road is elevated, so the road or the dam of the road was just enlarged in that part. And instead of filling the whole land under the building, there was only built a ring around the building, protecting the building from the floods. So with that measurement, the cost of building a real plinth to support the whole building would be minimized to the cost of that dam. That's the compound. It's more or less little pavilions, very densely arranged. And you're entering the building from above. There is an upper level. It looks like a green landscape, and then you're moving down the stairs into that village, which is built of local brick again. They provide trainings for local people, and the knowledge from there is transferred to the villages again. That's the dam you can see here. The building is there now since 2011, and so far it has resisted to all the floods. When it comes to building with water, of course, boats are always an option, and I would say in Bangladesh you should consider boats also to be a part of architecture. There is a very long tradition, and some NGOs now trying to preserve that tradition by learning people again how to work with traditional materials and skills to do the boats. They plan to do a boat museum to preserve the heritage and the knowledge. And they also run floating hospitals, mostly in the north of the country, where health care is brought to the very remote areas. Again, architects are working on these projects. For example, the Rainbow Warrior, which is now down there in the Bay of Bengal, was transformed by an architect into a floating hospital. Schools, floating schools, that's an option to bring education to remote areas. Traditional boats which are transformed into classrooms. And one project which is, I think, very interesting in terms of building with water is this school building. It's an amphibious school. It's not a boat, but it's not a solid building either. Because
can you speak a little bit, please? Can you speak a little bit? Can you speak a little
bit louder? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
All right. This is a school again, and in the dry season, the context looks like that. There is a river here, and in the flood season, water is coming up, and the whole area is flooded. So the architect was thinking of how to create a building which is there during all the seasons. It's not a boat, because a boat could only be there in the wet season. But the school needs to be there in the dry season as well. And he came up with a kind of a raft construction using recycled oil barrels, and on top of it there's a bamboo pavilion. So the building is constantly going up and down with the flood level. The whole thing is built up on a modular system. It can be enlarged. It can be repeated throughout the country. So it's kind of a prototype which was created. And the first of these prototypes has been built now. This is how it looks like in the dry season. You see the oil barrels down here. So the building is standing on solid ground, and during the flood season it is just floating. Classrooms. So with that type of buildings, it is possible to bring education also to areas where you usually do not have schools in buildings or on boats. There is also a plant nursery there, and even plants now they can swim during the wet season. if you look at the building, you cannot really tell, is it a solid building, is it a pavilion, or is it a boat? Then maybe another building which is located in the south of Bangladesh, the area which is very much affected by the cyclones. It is a cyclone shelter. This is a school, again, during the normal regular seasons. When the cyclones are hitting the coast, people can protect themselves by going into the shelter. The idea is very simple. The storm is looking like this, so the architect sort of fighting the storm with its own weapons, creating a spiral type of building, a ramp going up onto the roof. The reason is that we do not only want to protect people during the storm, but also the cattle, the animals, because after the storm, of course, you need something to eat, and everything around will be destroyed. So the cattle can be brought up on the ramp. The ramp is also protecting the building from the sun and from the wind, of course. This is how it looked like during the design process, and now it's being built. These are images just taken last week. After a 10 years process, the building is finally finished. Okay, there could be some more examples, mostly in the city, but I think that's okay for the moment. I would appreciate the rule to now follow up and some more input on the general to the particular. On the general to the particular. Thank you, Niklaus.